Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's Housing Scrutiny Committee meeting. Just before we get into the agenda, just go through the normal chair introduction. I think we've got one person in the public gallery, but it's a leader. So this is a meeting of the council held in public. It is not a public meeting. There's no fire drill planned. So if the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the exit nearest the large screen at the front of the room and proceed down to the fire exit in the courtyard. Once it's safe to return, councillors will receive a text message. Officers will also advise when it is safe to return to the meeting. We're recording the meeting this evening using our webcasting system. The webcast will be transmitted live and will also be available on the council's website following the meeting. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. I think that's it. Okay. So, first item on the agenda, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest from the members? Councillor Headley. Thank you for that. Okay, so item number 3 on the agenda, the Housing Improvement Plan, which is on page 5 of the agenda. Councillor Blake.
Chairman, under the circumstances of what's gone on with the email trail of recent days and whatnot, I think I need to put on record certainly the fact that your email that you sent to us was patronising and condescending at the very least. Telling us that we need to make sure we read the agenda. Like, so I've been a councillor for 30 years. I know when I have to read the agenda. Can live with that. But what then happens is, very late, we get more information to come through for us to read, which we can't open. And therefore, I haven't read everything. I haven't been totally informed. It's been disgraceful. This is coming from an op member who stands up at a planning committee and said, I've received 100 emails from residents and admits that he doesn't read any. And the next breath, you're telling us that we've got to read everything page by page because we're going to go through the agenda page by page. That is not on. It's intimidating. It's wrong. And I understand I can't adjourn the meeting at all. But I'll listen if anybody else got anything before I make a judgment. As far as I'm concerned, I should be standing up and leaving the meeting because I feel intimidated by your comments. And to be honest with you, one of the biggest issues is time and time again we are getting this information come through, so not just this committee, generally, coming through, with agendas coming through, lastminute.com every time. It can be a day of a council, day of a full council, we're getting it. It's not good enough, it's not acceptable, and somewhere along the line someone has to make a stand, and I'm certainly prepared to do that tonight. It's wrong, it shouldn't be happening, it needs to be addressed, but that doesn't take away from the issues that I've raised about yourself and your own conduct.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Councillor Blake. Just in response to that, I think the first thing I would say is that as I understand it, the agenda was issued for this meeting in line with the timing and parameters and was accessed by several members of the group. So the key point was the agenda available for the meeting. If I understand what you said correctly, that if in other meetings that hasn't happened, then obviously that's regrettable. But as regards this meeting, that did happen. So
you missed the point. I did not say that the agenda didn't.
Sorry, Councillor Blake. I mean, you've made several, reasonably telling accusations, if I may say so, about my conduct. So if I could be allowed to respond to them before you interject again, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. So yeah, number 1, the agenda was issued in line with the stipulated timing. Number 2, the additional information that was circulated is literally that, was intended to be additional supporting information, certainly not critical to the agenda. The intention, it was my judgment to send it out, Councillor Blake, and the intention was to send it out earlier, but unfortunately that didn't happen for whatever reason. So I took the decision yesterday at my final briefing to send it out to the members in case they had a chance to read it. So that's, you know, absolutely not critical, and as far as I'm concerned, there's no reason at all why that should disrupt the flow of the meeting. And as regards the comment that you made about the planning committee, as you well know as a councillor of 30 years standing who's been on the planning committee for many years, it is out of process for members of the public to lobby members of the planning committee the day before a meeting when there is an established process within planning that members of the public's views can be recorded and taken into account, and indeed are in the agenda. So the suggestion that I didn't read 100 emails because I couldn't be bothered is ridiculous. The reason okay, well, the suggestion. Okay, well, the suggestion that that was in any way inappropriate or out of process is not correct. So I'm not sure if I covered all your points there, but if I haven't, please do come back.
Yes, certainly. I think it's people's democratic right to contact their councillors or their people on the committee to let them know. That's the idea of them doing. Bear in mind, we only allow a certain amount of people to actually talk at the meeting. It's one of the only ways actually to get their views across. I never said for 1 minute that I did not get the agenda on time. Never did I say that. I never did I say I didn't read that. So again, you said something that I did not say. It's the attachments that come to it. And I read what it says in there, and these will help you make a judgment. That's what it says in there. So how can you say it has no relevance to the meeting? It's going to help me and other members on this committee make a judgment about things we're being asked to scrutinise. So for you to say that it means nothing at all what's in those things is nonsense, because it does. It clearly says in there, and have a look at your emails, by all means, the officer's saying there is stuff in there that will help you to make a decision. And we've not been able to do that. I've not been able to open that. So I can't sit here and say I can make an honest decision on anything purely on the basis of I haven't been able to because of the system that the council run will not allow me to open it up. That's what I said. So I never criticised the officers about the thing at all, about the agenda.
Okay, let's just, if I could just respond to that, Councillor Headley, if you wouldn't mind, before we go. I mean, I think it's certainly correct, Councillor Blake, to say that one member of the committee at least has raised the issue that they couldn't access the agenda. So that's what I was referring to. Apologise if that was in any way ambiguous. And obviously, yes, one of the officers has circulated that note and, you know, worded it as they thought was appropriate at the time, but as far as I'm concerned, as chair, I can fully assure you that that is additional information not pertinent. And in fact, if we, I mean, we'll move on to this shortly, but if I can just refer to the matters for consideration in the agenda, it says Housing Scrutiny Committee is asked to note the development and ongoing implementation of the Housing Improvement Plan, which supports our compliance with the regulator's social housing consumer standards. Now, this is something that I asked to be put on the agenda for the information of the members. It's not something we're making a judgment on. We don't have to comment on it at all. It is simply for reference. So, apologies if there's any ambiguity in there at all, but this is not something we're making a decision on, or we're, if we choose not to, required to scrutinise. So, as I said, as chair, my position remains those additional pieces of information were exactly that. They were readily accessible using the council-issued computer, and they were accessed by more than one member of this committee. So I don't think it's correct to say that they were not accessible either. But that...
Well, sorry, I never said it was. I said it was not accessible for me with an iPhone.
Sorry, Councillor Blake, you didn't say that. And no, you didn't. You didn't mention the word iPhone. Can I just say, I am the chair of this meeting. If you wish to speak, raise your hand and I'll choose whether you're allowed to speak. Do not speak back to me in that manner in my meeting. Do you understand?
No, I don't. No.
Okay, fine. Councillor Headley.
Chairman, I'm new to this committee, and I was only able to access the 4 or 5 regulator of social housing documents when I arrived half an hour ago, so I haven't had time to read them. They're quite comprehensive documents, which I feel would help our understanding of the agenda items. Now, it may not be in the Constitution that this meeting can accept a motion of deferment, but it is in your power as chairman, given that there is some ambiguity about how many of us have been able to access papers that support the committee's agenda. I'd respectfully ask you to consider postponing and rescheduling this meeting so that we have had time to read all the appropriate documents. I've got 5 of them open here. To be honest, I'm not technically skilled enough to read 5 documents whilst the meeting's taking place.
Thank you for your courteous observations, Councillor Headley. Yeah, I'm kind of repeating myself now a little bit, but reading and digesting those documents is not critical to the conduct of this agenda item. Take it from me as chair. So if there are any questions around, what they do, Councillor Headley, is they explain the consumer standards which are applicable from the housing regulator. Now, the officers are here, they're expert in those matters. If you have any questions on the 4 consumer standards, please feel free to ask the officers, and I'm sure they will expand on it. But I don't wish to defer the meeting. The reason is that there are interested parties watching and with a vested interest in this who will be concerned about us pursuing with this council business. We've got residents in 10,000 council homes across the borough for whom this is a very important matter, and for whom we need to be scrutinising and progressing agenda items such that they can proceed on to Cabinet for decision making. That's the first thing. The second thing is we also have the possibility, I'm not sure when or where, but the possibility of an inspection by the housing regulator, as has happened, as I understand it, from other local authorities in the near area. And again, I know that one of the areas they're particularly concerned about is that policies are being properly scrutinised and progressed in an appropriate manner. And I don't think that they would, accept the points that are being put forward together as a reason for postponing the meeting. So those are my reasons, for not complying with your request. But I appreciate your wording and your courtesy. Thank you. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, Chair. I'm going to go at this from a different angle because I did email explaining that I could not access the agenda, and the only way I could do it was through my work computer, which I was unable to bring with me because it's slightly larger than the normal one we've got. So kindly the officer printed it off for me. This is the first I've seen properly of the agenda, and as such, and as a responsible councillor of a few years, which seems to me that I'm a few more years down the line than you are, not that it makes much difference, I suppose, but I would say that as I have not been able to read the agenda and digest what's in it, whether it's just for noting or for voting, it doesn't really matter. Our responsibility is first and foremost to our residents, and I personally will not be able to conduct my duties responsibly by not knowing what's in this agenda and not having had the time to read it because I wasn't accessing. So I'm going to respectfully ask you if you would excuse me from the meeting, because I can't personally give honest answers to anything that I haven't had time to read properly, and I apologise for that, but I just really cannot do it. So that's my apologies. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Brotman, and obviously I understand what you're saying. I mean, I would stress that the agenda was issued in line with the standard council procedure. It was posted on the council's website a week in advance, and it was readily accessible from there. I know I was able to access it, and a number of the other members here are. We'll answer your question in a second, but I need to put. You've raised a very important point, and I need to respond in a fulsome manner to it. So it was available. So I'm not sure, to be honest, why you weren't able to access it, but I understand you're saying you weren't able to access it. So I'm just going to consult with the vice chair, if I may, on your query. Just a second. So, Councillor Brockman, if you feel that you are unable to participate in the meeting, then yes, I'm fine for you to leave the meeting if that's the position. Thank you. Councillor Headley.
I think the other point that I'd like to make, Chairman, is that for scrutiny to function properly, it's essential that members have had the opportunity to gather all the information they can, both from the agenda papers and from those additional regulatory papers. I'm not confident that I can ask the right questions of officers without having had the opportunity to read those papers in detail. So I do think there's a scrutiny function. It's essential that we have the time to prepare for such meetings so that we can ask relevant, objective questions and to solicit the information from officers and anybody else that might like to add their three pennies. But I'm in the same position, really.
Yes,
I don't feel that I can do justice to this particular agenda without further time to read all the attached papers.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've already addressed your position, Councillor Headley. So, sorry, you're walking off without me responding, are you?
No, I'm still listening.
Would you mind just resuming your seat? I think it's a little bit discourteous to be packing your stuff up while I'm trying to respond to a reasonable question that you've raised. I've already addressed that issue. As I said, those documents are not fundamental to this agenda. If you wish to research the agenda following receipt further on gov.uk, for example, following receipt of the agenda, then that is your prerogative and you've had a week to do so. So I'm afraid I can't accept your comments.
With respect, I was only made aware of those documents this evening. I hadn't seen them before, and normally at this council and at county, there's quite comprehensive training on any documents, particularly through the audit committee. There's an awful lot of training on regulatory documents that may influence the way in which we scrutinise any aspect of our council work. And as I say, I don't feel that I'm in a position to offer proper scrutiny until I've had an opportunity to read in detail all of those supplementary papers.
Right, okay. Sorry, could you switch your mic off, Councillor Hadley? Can I ask the monitoring officer to, were you going to comment on that? No?
All I was going to, I've just had a chat to Kirsty, who was saying that the session is training. I think in fact, it's probably for Kirsty to respond.
Okay.
So the first presentation we brought, that is the training. That is us talking through the regulator, the regulatory requirements. That is the purpose of this first presentation, is the training for the scrutiny, and the additional documents are to further read after that to familiarise themselves.
Thank you, Kirsty. Sorry, guys, would you mind just listening to what the officers are saying rather than walking out in an extremely discourteous manner? Okay. Right.
Would you like a pause?
No, sorry. Yeah, we're just going to report, for anyone watching online, we're just going to pause the recording for 2 minutes. Okay, so for those watching online, the webcast is now continuing. We have had the departure of 3 of the 5 members of the committee. However, I've been advised by the Council's monitoring officer, so their legal expert, that we are quorate to continue the meeting with the 2 members present, so we will be doing that. So back to the agenda, if I may. So the agenda item we were on was the Housing Improvement Plan, agenda item number 3 on page 5 of the agenda. So I'm just going to read the matters for consideration again. So the Housing Scrutiny Committee is asked to note the development and ongoing implementation of the Housing Improvement Plan, which supports compliance with the Regulator of Social Housing's new consumer standards and prepares the Council for future inspections. So over to the team for the presentation. Thank you.
So good evening, Chair and Vice Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to present our progress and our update on the Housing Improvement Plan. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through the progress we've made since our last report and the challenges we've addressed and our ongoing commitment to meeting the regulator's customer standards and delivering a better outcome for our tenants. The Regulator for Social Housing, the RSH, is now playing a much more proactive role in holding landlords accountable. Their primary goal is to ensure tenants live in a safe, well-maintained homes and receive respectful, responsive services. They've introduced legally enforcement customer standards and the inspection programmes are underway. This gives tenants more power and it places a clear responsibility on us to meet those high expectations consistently. Ready for number 3? Sorry. Yeah, well, I've got somebody else pressing the button. I wasn't sure we'd gone there. sorry. The importance of these standards cannot be overstated. The RSH has now legal powers to intervene where we are failing. A C1 or C2 rating from the regulator signals that we're performing well and meeting those obligations. However, if we were to achieve a C3 or C4, this would mean serious or very serious failings for the council as a landlord and would damage our credibility with the tenants and with the public. It's about accountability, it's about trust, and most importantly, it's about preventing any harm to our residents and ensuring they've got safe, secure homes. We will be assessed across 4 key standards: the safety and quality standard, the tenancy standard, the neighbourhood and community standard, and the transparency, accountability and influence standard. These cover everything from gas safety to repairs, how we involve tenants in that decision making. It's a comprehensive framework that demands strong governance, really key emphasis on data and the integrity of that data, and most importantly about a culture of a tenant-centred service delivery, which is key and what we're aiming for as a council. Following a self-assessment and independent legal review by Capsticks, we've identified some key weaknesses. Their performance reporting was sporadic, tenant engagement lacked structure. It was happening, but there wasn't a lot of visibility and there wasn't a way of following up on those things completely. Our use of tenant data needed improving massively. The feedback shaped by Housing Improvement Plan we are working to today, it's a plan around compliance, accountability and a better service outcome for those residents in the way in which we can finalise that bring round that circle and fully understand that data and use it more proactively. The Housing Improvement Plan has been co-designed across housing teams to drive real embedded change, which is what we desperately need. It aims to improve services, strengthen our compliance and deliver better outcomes for our tenants and leaseholders. This isn't just box ticking, You know, there are things we have to do legally, but it's more important than that. It's about a complete cultural change in the way in which we act as a landlord, and ensuring that we've got a sustainable service throughout that transformation that benefits our residents, and that they are the key of they're very heart of what we're doing. In March 2025, we implemented a formal governance structure, including a strategic housing improvement board and an operational group. This model ensures alignment from leadership all the way through our officers, right to the very front line of our services. It creates clear accountability, gives momentum to delivery, and ensures that decisions are grounded in operational realities, but has strategic oversight. We launched a tenancy audit and review in June 2025 using an area-based test and learn model. This will help us understand the quality of our tenancy management and highlight areas that are requiring improvement. Once evaluated, we'll roll out this across the whole borough and embed it into our core operations. It directly supports the tenancy and transparency standards by ensuring that we have accurate records and that we're a very responsive service, so as needs change, that we are able to be nimble and meet those needs. We saw an encouraging increase in the response of tenant satisfaction measures survey from 879 in last year to 1,249 in 2024-2025. This reflects a growing trust, and the level of engagement. Those final results are being processed, and we remain on track to submit them to the regulator by the 30th of June, which is our deadline. That doesn't make sense. We met that, didn't we? Sorry. Alongside this, we're progressing with new policies, including the revised repairs charter and the tenant and leaseholder strategy. This will strengthen our service and will definitely mean that there is more accountability. We're now producing structured performance reports across the 6 compliance areas of gas, fire, carbon monoxide, water, lifts and asbestos. We did used to obviously have these and the reports were made, but they weren't then reported and fed back, so that we knew that we were compliant and that our tenants were safe, but we weren't actually using that data to the full. So as a result, these reports will support our strategic decision making, our investment planning, and ensure that we're meeting those health and safety obligations. It's key for us to understand that and to see the way in which this can feed into our safety and quality standards, but also for long-term planning in terms of planned works, what that can look like in response to some of this data. Looking ahead, our next steps are about embedding and accelerating delivery of these changes. We're aligning with the corporate leadership team, developing a delivery plan with clear milestones, and establishing regular meetings with project leaders, just to keep that momentum going. We have regular updates that we're going to be bringing forward to the Scrutiny Committee. It's really important that the work we're doing has transparency and accountability. And so it is envisaged that we'll be back to you in the autumn and again in the spring, and that you'll keep getting the updates of where we are in terms of progress, and ensuring that we are embedding this across the services as we are telling you tonight we are doing. There we are. I'm happy to take questions. The team is here to answer questions in terms of where we're at now and where we hope to be. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. That was very informative. So, firstly, I'd like to ask Councillor Webb if you've got any points of clarification on the presentation that Councillor Brown's just given.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd just like to say it's, I think what the important aspect of this is, from the outset, you've engaged an independent review, and that's identified the gaps going forward before an audit. I suppose my first question would be, I mean, an auditor, the regulator can, say they're coming in tomorrow. Will we be ready, or how ready are we?
Thank you, Councillor Webb. So we have been engaging very closely with our regulatory partners. So we meet with them every 6 months to discuss our progress. And one of the key pieces of learning that we've had through our training with the regulator is they at this stage are not expecting perfection from local authorities. They appreciate this is a new standard that's developing, but the biggest critique that they sort of pass through to us in our training is that gap analysis and being able to demonstrate that you've got active plans in place to meet your weaknesses. So it's about acknowledging where there are difficulties and actively addressing those. So yes, we are very ready in terms of understanding those gaps, and what's coming through to this meeting in terms of the exception reporting will demonstrate a continuing progress against that. So what the regulator wants to see from us is that we've addressed the gaps, but we haven't left the gaps, that we have got a plan in place to address those periodically, and that they are moving along at an adequate pace, and we're resourcing that. So yes, no, we aren't in perfection currently, but we have the plans in place to ensure we're addressing the gaps.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I suppose leading on from that, yes, we've got some very effective policies and strategies on documents we're going to be reviewing a little bit later. Most of which is really implementing things that have already best practice that have been in place for many years. I mean, that's not a criticism, but obviously as a document going forward, it's important to have that in place anyway. I suppose what I would like to see really is more quantitative and qualitative data around that, just to fill in those gaps, to see where we are and where the gaps are and what we need to do to improve things, so we are robustly ready really when the regulator does visit.
So this first meeting has been to demonstrate the regulatory position and the progress to date. What will be brought forward from the team is there will be exception reporting against the plan, and there'll also be a percentage progress update against the plan actions. We will also have a plan that is published within the next 8 weeks, which the public will also be able to see our progress against that plan for transparency, and members across all parties will be able to see. So that fits with the transparency agenda, but you'll also have that information and the performance dashboards coming to this committee for scrutiny. Upon scrutiny, those will then be shared online again, so residents have clear view and sight of performance that is shared in the exact same format as they receive at scrutiny. So there's transparency again in those performance datas.
That's okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. So what I'd like to do now is just to run through the information on this item contained in the agenda, so the report and the PowerPoint or the presentation in order, and just see if we've got any, Councillor Webb or I have any questions on those. So Councillor Webb, have you got any, so the report obviously starts on page 5 of the agenda. Have you got that to hand?
Yes, around a decent home standard particularly. I understand the... So, thanks. Yeah, so regarding decent homes, I understand recent information from the regulator is that nationally 50% of homes fall below a decent home standard. How does that apply to Basildon Council? And if so, and what the effect that would be and the impact that would be from the facts that we know, and the cost implication going forward.
Yeah, so we've got our figures in one of the reports.
And they're in one of the slides in the pack.
But we are much higher than 50%. Decent Homes is also changing. They are bringing out a follow-up to it. I'd suggest that Decent Homes is a component-led system of making sure that components are basically changed in a certain time frame. We are compliant with it. However, it's our opinion that we should take more of a holistic view of estates moving forward. Instead of just going in, changing kitchens or changing bathrooms or changing windows, for example, we should actually go and do everything at once. Just because it's more cost effective. You're not coming back into an estate and doing lots of different work in different years. But as long as we are, within the ranges, but I just caution that Decent Homes itself, this is probably more of a personal view than a council view, is not a great way of gauging the quality of your housing stock. I just also add that our stock is 70 to 80 years old, not some of it, pretty much all of it. So that's going to have its own problems, and when Decent Homes is about components, it's not necessarily about structures. So when you've got things which are starting to fall down, it doesn't really matter if you've got a new kitchen or not, does it? It's not.
That slide might be helpful.
Yeah, but we are obviously compliant, you can see, but Decent Homes to me is not a great indicator of the state of our stock. That's all I'd add. But from a regulation point of view, of course, it's very, very important.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yes, I understand that. The going back on to what was it mentioned about the asbestos, for example. It's good that obviously the actual inspection rate is good, but it doesn't actually show really the actual results from that. The implications to, for example, the residents. How much after inspection, how much work actually needs to be done, what actually happens to the residents, how they're engaged with the whole process and so on. So I would think that would be something that obviously the regulator would be drilling down into, something of that kind of data, rather than just reporting back, the inspection rate is performing well. Want to really know what the impact that is for residents.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. We're currently working on those dashboards that should be coming to the October Scrutiny Committee. Within those dashboards, what it will demonstrate is not only the compliancy, but the actions, the outstanding actions, and the ragging of those actions, and the, in terms of dates of compliancy. So what you'll see is not only the completion figures, but also the outstanding works and the date in which those works should be completed. So for the 3 dashboards you'll get going forward, that will be on the service standards dashboard, which is all your quality standards. So that will be included. So it'll be the outcomes against the KPI.
No, that's lovely. Thank you very much for that.
So, any further questions, Councillor Ware, on either the report or the contents of the PowerPoint presentation?
Just one other thing, going back to the rating, the regulatory ratings. Obviously, to have a bad rating, C3, C4, for example. The reputational impact on the council will be bad, but that doesn't tell the whole story. Also, there will be other things that would impact negatively. Perhaps it might be worthwhile just to, if you can, just explain the broader context of that. Thank you.
So with a C3 or C4 decision, we have worked very closely with our Essex partners, and there are partners across local authorities. Most local authorities are scoring at around a C3 because this is new legislation for local authorities. Housing associations have been operating against these standards for a more substantial period of time. So learning from that best practice of the journey that housing associations have been on and the colleagues that we've had across other Essex authorities, the main implication is resourcing and cost implication. So like the housing improvement plan we have, any inspection would require you to address your weaknesses, and they would expect that to be done expediently. So that for other authorities, that has been significant uplifts in recruitment and staff resourcing costs to expedite some of this policy development. It's also been, where there's been issues around compliancy, expensive surveyors, getting in additional contractors to do inspections. So it is mainly resourcing, but a significant cost implication because the regulator would be regularly not inspecting, but coming back to check against the compliancy of the plan. So they would be expecting that to be moving at pace, and that takes resourcing, because housing as a sort of business as usual is an incredibly busy service. So you have to sort of pump prime that service, which obviously has a significant cost implication and diversions of funds from other discretionary areas of the council. So it does affect other services that may need to reduce in order to resource that.
No, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Webb and Kirsty. So I'm just running through the questions that I had on. I had no questions on the report, actually, just some questions on the PowerPoint, some of which you partially addressed, but I'll just run through them anyway, if I may. So my first question was what the plans were outside of the scrutiny group, of course, to communicate with members on progress and compliance, because obviously I think you touched upon we can all members to a lesser or greater extent can expect casework, and I think you basically touched upon that. You said that we're publishing a report in September that will be both available to residents and members.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually being done under sort of comms plan, so there's a variety of ways. So at the Housing Improvement Board, that has representatives that are tenant and leaseholders on it. It will have Councillor Brown as the Cabinet Member for Housing and Infrastructure. There'll be Councillor E. Callaghan from a tenant engagement and performance perspective, and Councillor McGeorge as the Cabinet Member for Older People to have that sheltered focus. So there'll be 3 static members on that group. There'll also be tenant representatives on that group and officers of the council. So it's about collaborative partnership working to drive tenant outcome. So that's one form. We will also be driving performance data, because those big 6 are really what makes people's homes safe, and what we want is for people to be able to sleep soundly in their homes at night. And that should be, cross-party and across the council what our focuses are on. So we will come to Cabinet twice a year with those performance indicators, because safety is our utmost priority in terms of our homes. So those will come to Cabinet. So again, that will be a wider Cabinet portfolio that see that. We will also have a performance and transparency area on the website, which we will have. It will be a landlord voice. That will be shared on your normal member communications, and there'll be opportunities there. Now, throughout when we talk through the tenant and leaseholder paper later, that will also have a comms plan. So that will be thematic reviews of issues. Members are always welcome to feedback on those groups, and that will then feed into our plan. So there's sort of a menu of involvement for members. So backbench members or cabinet members, there's opportunity to engage in this throughout a number of processes. So yes, no matter where people sit as a councillor, there is opportunities to engage in this material at a number of levels. So we hope that gives a spread of coverage across all parties and all members.
Thank you. And presumably one of the 3 cabinet members involved could report back to full council should they see fit on progress. So
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, things will go. Yeah, things will go that come to cabinet after it's been through. You come to cabinet, then there are certain things that will need to go to full council. So definitely that will be available.
Lovely, thank you, Councillor Brown. So again, another one that we kind of touched upon, but I would still like to ask the question. So is there a mechanism within the plan to identify issues which are likely to become pressing in the short to medium term, as well as the status now, so that we can proactively plan? So for example, a group of properties of a certain age, as you touched upon, John, require replacement windows, or the data that we're receiving in terms of resident responses shows that mould is starting to become a problem in a certain estate.
Yes, so what we will have is we'll have those dashboards that we discussed. So those 4 pillars, there'll be 3 dashboard reports that reflect each of those, and they'll be delivered thematically in terms of that performance. So you'll be able to see where the performance lies with those 4 standards. That will be reported. So again, that will be areas for scrutiny. It will be also areas where myself and John can talk through any gaps, anything that we're having to resource to address any issues. There will also be exception reports that come here every single meeting, so they'll be delivered quarterly. We will probably go to Cabinet at least annually with overall progress against the plan, and then that also then goes through our internal mechanisms, so through the senior leadership team, through the exec team, and through the Housing Improvement Board, which most importantly has our residents on. so residents will see accountability around that performance. So there's sort of a tiered approach, ensuring that all stakeholders are getting that engagement and information.
And that, just to confirm, sorry, that includes stuff that's coming at us in a year's time as well as stuff that's current. Yeah, okay, thank you. So again, might seem a bit of an obvious question, but can you just briefly talk me through what we mean by "you said, we did," and maybe give me a practical example of how that would work and what channel you might communicate it through?
Yeah, so we've been doing lots of work around tenant voice and learning from housing associations that are much further forward on this journey than we are. We need to make sure that the language we use is accessible for all of our tenants, so we want to keep language plain English, and really it is "you said, we did." So in the further paper we had this evening, we talk about a menu of involvement, so people can be as involved or as minimally involved as they want, but there's opportunities for all tenants to involve in a methodology that suits them and fits with their lifestyle. With "you said, we did," it's really around when we are engaging and consulting. Currently we do it and we go and tweak policies, but what we need to do is go back and say the outcome. So this could be example of, we are looking at policy around tenant engagement, and we're saying to people, how do you want to engage with us? Do you want to see more digital comms? Do you want to see a website that's a tenant and landlord relationship, a little bit separate from Basildon Council? Do you want to see face-to-face events? You know, do you have caring responsibilities, disabilities? Do you want to speak to us in the evening? Then what our comms plan, when we publish that, will say, you know, you said more evening meetings, so now we've got 8 focus groups throughout the year that are delivered between 6 and 8 p.m. So it's just really simply saying, yeah, this is what you said to us as residents, and this is what we're doing. But we also need to do that on things that are more difficult decisions as well. So where feedback has been one resident voice, but we say legislatively, we are doing this policy because the legislative requirement requires us to do X. So things like homelessness, priority need, it can be quite an unpopular decision, but it's a legislative decision, it's not an officer-led decision. So it's for us as well to also explain to residents, if something is a certain way, why is it a certain way? So again, "you said, we did" works both positively and negatively, and that's what we really want to use, that language around plain simple English, and ensuring that our residents really understand the way in which we're communicating, and we try to keep out jargon and acronyms. We try to make it really about what matters to tenants.
Great, that sounds good. Okay, so just moving on to the progress against the plan section of the presentation. This is page 19 to 22. So is the tenant satisfaction measures survey basically prescribed by the regulator, or do we have any scope as a council to shape it, even if it means just adding a few extra elements on to an existing survey?
So we have a cap of 3 additional questions we are permitted to ask. So yes, it is prescribed. It's to enable some benchmarking and consistency, not only between local authorities but also housing associations, and we've always had different standards in the past, and actually we're all here to deliver for tenant outcomes regardless of whether we're a housing association or a local authority. So it is about standardisation of the industry, which is very positive, but yeah, that's sort of what we're heading towards. But we are working closely with people like TPAS, which is a national organisation to help with resident participation around what are the handiest 3 questions to be asking and what's been learnt from other authorities. So what we will bring before we design next year's is to Scrutiny and to E. Callaghan's attention for Cabinet member for engagement, is what do we really want to be driving as those 3 questions, because there's not a lot of wiggle room there. So it's just making sure that each year that we pick what's most pertinent for us to know about our tenants that year.
And that,
yeah, absolutely.
And that's what gives us a reactive, nimble response, is that we can change those 3 each year depending where we're at and what information we're getting from Jonathan's team, etc.
Yeah. But everything else is prescribed.
Yeah, I thought that might be the case, but and obviously there's good reasons for that as well. So that's fine. Thanks for clarifying. So does this survey include demographic or other tenant profile data?
So it's our responsibility to know our tenant profile, which is why we're doing the tenancy audits. What we are able to do is when we have a a minimum number of returns that we have to have as an organisation to demonstrate that we've got enough resident voice to show compliancy. But what we can do is, when we've got a more detailed tenant profile, if we get more responses, we can ensure that we have submitted the responses that reflect our tenant profile to make sure that, you know, we have everyone answering is not over 65, that we've got lived experience across a number of demographics. So it is permissible within the TSM to make sure that you can demonstrate that it's not skewed by one particular group. So what we do is we match our responses and the demographics of our responses against the tenant profile to make sure that that's equal and complete in terms of an answer.
And that's also the same for when we're having tenants representing on the boards that we're looking at in order to drive this forward, is that those tenants, you know, we've got leaseholders and we've got, you know, and we've got tenants, and what that looks like, and it's going to be reflective of that data profile of, and it needs to be across the whole piece. So it's something that feeds into everything that we're doing.
Okay, thanks. So just so I've got this straight then, so obviously we create a tenant profile. We've got the responses to the tenant satisfaction measures survey. Are we able to tie the two together at an aggregate level? So basically, so we can identify who's responded and tie that to their response and view it at an aggregate level. Okay, thank you. That's good to know. Okay, and again, I think I know the answer to this question before I ask it, but I assume that the regulator also prescribes the format and the content of what data we submit back to them as the outcome of the survey.
Yep, so we have a national returns database, so that includes all of our, we call it ladder data, LADR data, so all of our housing data again, so it's comparable to other local authorities and housing associations, and the same with the TSM results. We have a prescribed 28-page document, which we then do all of the fields, so again, you get that equal comparison. So yes, it's all prescribed.
Great, thank you. And just one last question actually on this agenda item from me. So could you go to the slide where we had our interim performance data? Please. So this is slide, or page 23 of the agenda, I think it's that one, yeah. So I just wanted to check, have we got fire and carbon monoxide data? Because I don't think, unless I'm misreading it, that it's on there.
So the fire and carbon monoxide reporting is being worked on at the moment with Louise and with John's team. So that will be ready for the October meeting that comes through. So yeah, what the same as what I explained to Councillor Webb earlier, that will not only be compliancy, that will be paired with the outcomes and actions and the dates in which they should be completed due to the risk factor of each of the actions.
Okay, thanks. And I know you haven't got the data, but any indication whether the performance is as encouraging as what we're seeing now, and those are the key metrics?
Yeah, so as part of the gas checks, there'll be a carbon monoxide just to check the monitors in there. And we obviously, in all our properties, we put in smoke alarms. There's no requirement to do an actual fire check of each property. That's not what we do, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so have you got any further questions, Councillor Webb, on item number 3 on the agenda?
Thanks, Chair. Just one, really going back to the tenant satisfaction measures. There were 1,249 responses, which was good. The results were submitted to the regulator in June, the end of June. Was anyone privy, any members privy to the results of that before they went?
So we, because we do it in a prescribed platform, we aren't allowed to publish or discuss the results until they've been audited by the regulator and then they're ready to share. So we bring that back to scrutiny in September. We have seen a positive uplift across all areas, but again, that has to be audited by the regulator before we're allowed to publish or share that information.
Yeah, understood. Thank you.
Okay, so I think no further questions from either of us on that agenda item number 3. So let's move on now, if we may, to item number 4, so the temporary accommodation placement policy, page 27 of the agenda. So I will just read the matters for consideration, which are... that the Housing Scrutiny Committee review and scrutinise the temporary accommodation placement plan. That's quite straightforward, isn't it? Okay. I guess back to you guys in terms of your presentation, please, on item number 4. Councillor Brown again? Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
what we need to ensure is that we have a robust policy that is transparent, that is easily understandable, and that is compliance to legislation given to us by central government. And we have a set of policies that reflect that, and that the actions that we take when we are considering that reflects that. I don't think it's any more complicated than that, really. Yeah. Happy to answer questions, but that is the purpose of this report, is to show that we are doing that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Webb, back to you then. Do you have any questions? If you're happy to take it in that format, either on the report or the policy, shall I just leave it with you in terms of going through your questions?
Yes, I've only just got... Thanks, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions, that's all. Really regarding the financial implications, really. What the cost implications are likely to be for the procurement of the temporary accommodation units outside of the borough, which are implied within the report.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. So the main purpose of this process is not just financial, but also availability. We are seeing significant lack of availability across this area, particularly. There are areas within the Basildon Borough. So there are areas of more dense development within 60 to 90 minutes from our borough, which we have purchased accommodation in those areas. For some of our residents that do not have ties to this area, we may explore areas outside of that where there is a more buoyant or affordable rental market. So obviously with all the decisions we're making, we're trying to make accommodation financially affordable for our residents. We don't want to, as a council, be covering those costs. We want people to be independent and resilient to take on their own costs, and we will support people to find accommodation that is suitable and affordable. So that is the main driver, that we're not using inappropriate and expensive short-term lets, nightly lets, and hotel and B&B, which don't provide that stability for our residents.
Yes, thank you. Also, there's just a question around, and it's more of a comment really, but page 44, paragraph 2, is about the assessment of housing need, where obviously some residents that may have specific disabilities may need a certain floor level. I know through just casework that comes through, that doesn't always seem to apply, and we do kind of receive complaints from residents regarding this. So, I mean, my concern really is about how this all is applied really in real life.
So there's two different suitabilities. So the allocation scheme and temporary accommodation are two completely different allocation schemes. When we're allocating people into property, it has to be suitable to meet their needs. So when we're first allocating someone a home, if they're able-bodied and have one child, and we place them into a 2-bedroom property, and that resident then becomes disabled, we have to await someone else to move from their tenancy to place them into a property. That's where we often get people living in accommodation that doesn't meet their needs, because their need has changed since they moved in. And then we have a number of people that have disabilities that are waiting for that accommodation. So that is the allocation scheme for permanent housing. When we look at temporary accommodation, suitability is looked at on a bit of a sliding scale. So if someone was made homeless tonight, getting a roof over their head is the most important thing to remove the immediate danger. The accommodation we place them in short term can't be wholly unsuitable in terms of they can't access it. So I can't put you on a 6th floor flat if you're in a wheelchair. but it might not be ideal in the short term. What the case law shows is the longer you're in temporary accommodation, we need to be consistently searching for something suitable. So what this policy does is ensure that those people that need those sites, if somebody's already residing in that accommodation, that we can move our stock to make sure people are in the most appropriate temporary accommodation. So this is separate from the overall allocation scheme, which is driven through legislation, and this is very much driven through case law. So it's two slightly different areas of law in terms of what that suitability looks like.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Thank you.
Okay, so that's all, I think, Councillor Webb's questions. I've got a few questions myself. So, starting in the report, in the background section on page 27, so the question is our level of approaches, which is around 3,000, or was around 3,000 in 24-25, and our trajectory, i.e. the approaches are up, but really in relatively low single figures in terms of percentage year on year, are they good, bad or indifferent, and how do they compare with other local authorities, that are comparable local authorities?
So when we look at statistics, we are comparable with the South East and London periphery, but also we're now seeing these same trend leg figures around other cities, so the periphery of Leeds, Manchester, etc., where they're seeing significant growth and regeneration in the centre of their cities, and then they're seeing those cost issues that then occur around the edge. So the local housing allowance rate was obviously quite an old piece of funding, and it's very difficult for those areas like Basildon and like other city peripheries where that level is quite low. There's a big gap between the rental sector and that volume, so that is significantly driving needs. People's rents are escalating and they don't have the income to meet those gaps, which is often driving lots of the homelessness. But also in this area it is suitability and availability of rental sector properties, so very few rental sector properties become available each week, and many landlords are selling, especially in the South East where the housing market is very buoyant, they are selling their properties, so we are losing landlords across the South East at quite a rapid rate. So as much as this is a definite national trend, we are particularly impacted around the periphery of London, but that is echoing around other cities and their peripheries as well.
Okay, so our level of 3,000, is that considered severe then, or?
Most authorities that previously have high levels of social housing and affordable rent, so we are comparable with the likes of Colchester, Chelmsford and Southend in Essex. Obviously when you look at areas again around Hertfordshire, you look at the areas in Surrey, this is very comparable for all of those sorts of localities. So yes, it is very severe and it is high, but unfortunately this is echoed not only across the country but specifically compounded in the South East.
Okay, locally, that's great. Okay, thank you for confirming that. So what specific steps have been successful in keeping our placement numbers static, basically, and getting our average duration down?
So the biggest assistance for this has been using capital spend to purchase our own temporary accommodation, because what we're able to do then, as we are the controlling landlord, we are able to move people round to ensure suitability and working alongside the housing allocations to try and churn that. We've also got funding that was agreed at Cabinet a few weeks ago, which is focusing on prevention, and we are angling the team to focus on prevention, so keeping young people living at home, having homelessness at home bans within our allocation scheme, trying to work with young singles to get them into affordable accommodation, which can often be HMOs, skills and education support, benefit support, so really trying to prevent that before happening. And even now working on early interventional AI, which is picking up homelessness before people realise they may be homeless, so people that are starting to accrue low-level council tax arrears, rent arrears, maybe a single parent living in rental accommodation that may have a much narrower margin to accept any increases in their rent. So yes, taking a prevention-based approach is our focus over the next year, and that is 100% where we're trying to drive staff allocation, because by the time someone approaches as homeless, that's you've lost at that point. That is, you know, you're into expensive TA territory. But yeah, having our own stock, which is something we previously haven't had, has made a significant impact in us to be able to manage that suitability.
Okay, thanks. So quite a few proactive steps from the administration and from obviously the housing officer team as well. Thank you, that's clear. Okay, so moving on to the policy now. So just looking at the descriptions of the zones firstly. So I notice in zone B, obviously there's a 90-minute, so zone B is 90 minutes from the borough boundary by public transport. What does that actually, that sounds like a lot. What does that actually mean in reality? Do we got a kind of north, south, east, west breakdown of that?
So that can be areas such as Southend, that can be areas such as Dartford, that could be areas like Southwood and Ferrers, that can be Grays, Thurrock. So those areas, sort of the towns adjacent to Basildon generally that have train or bus links, so that could take you out as far as the likes of Barking. So those sorts of periphery towns around Basildon, it normally suits those, and we look to procure properties that have adequate transport links back to Basildon or back to Essex.
Okay, so mainly Essex and some adjacent counties, if I'm understanding correctly. Thanks. So, so is the 90 minutes based upon strategy, i.e. that's a reasonable travelling distance, or expediency, i.e. that's the closest it can be and still allow the policy to work?
So this is based on case law. So we look at, when my head of service that looks after homelessness, we look at the legislation, not the legislation, but the case law is changing weekly. So we are constantly reviewing the case law, reviewing decisions, looking at judgments, looking at best practice, and ensuring that we are reflective of what would be suitable and acceptable. So yes, it's a very difficult area of law because it's very much driven by case law, but we have specialists in the team that are constantly reviewing that, and this has been a static position for some time in terms of case law. So.
Okay, so precedent basically then, I think. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so just moving on to Zone C now, what is the furthest, indicatively, the furthest placement away from the borough that we've got at present in Zone C, and kind of what's the outlook for this? Is it getting better or is it getting worse?
So we have, often we have people that want a Zone C property because they're fleeing DA or gang violence or violent crime. So we have placed people all around the country, but that has been at the request. In terms of standardising, Southend, Barking, Dartford, it tends to be those, but we need to ensure that we don't, we are working very hard on the local plan as an organisation. We're trying to, develop housing stock, both social housing and, affordable housing. So those things will happen, but we know that housing development can take a significant number of years. So bridging that gap and ensuring people are housed and not street homeless may mean that we have to look further afield in the future for availability and suitability. But we do aim to keep people as close to the borough as we can, but we have to be realistic in terms of the shortages that we currently have.
Okay, so it sounds like there's not a massive difference between Zone B and Zone C as it stands, unless for a particular reason that works for the residents. Okay, that's encouraging. Just moving on to Zone A now. Actually, I don't know why I did it in that order. Anyway, so quite a specific question, but what issues would present an EHCP, so an education healthcare plan for a child at school, being transferred to another local authority? Because I think it's one of the stipulations, isn't it?
So often with shortages of special education provision, we have to let the receiving authority know that a child needs a school place. Often we are told that they don't have a suitable place in their area, but also what we have to understand is that housing is sort of the bottom of the kind of hierarchy of needs of people's need, and disruption to children's education, especially with special educational provision, has a profound effect. There has been quite a lot of case law where people have argued against the move because the move would have had a profound undesirable effect on the child. So it's been led from a case law position, but as an authority we want to support that. We don't want to create any more social problems as a result of an already difficult situation for a family that needs support.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So it could be lack of SEM provision in adjacent boroughs than in schools. Okay, thank you. So again, there was a section talking about children attending special school. Again, this is rather a specific question, but one I've got a little bit of personal knowledge about. So, what would the situation be with a child living in our borough, say potentially, southeast, so maybe say Langdon, whatever, who is attending the Treetops Special School in Grays? How does that play out? Because obviously that school's quite close, but it's not an Essex County Council run facility.
So for every homeless case, for every family living in temporary accommodation, we have to look at the whole family portrait. So as you can see from each criteria, at the end of each criteria is a by exception report, so exceptional circumstance. Special education provision is absolutely, we know, doesn't have clear boundaries sometimes because those schools meet very, very specific needs. So in those situations, we always consider the SEN or physical disability need, but we would look at that case in line with that exceptional circumstances criteria. That would be it would be applied very infrequently generally, but if a family said we would like to be placed in zone B because our child's at school in Treetops, we absolutely would support that. What the real focus of this is making sure that people that really, really do need to be in the borough remain in the borough, but we are flexible. If there's a family request, we will always try and meet that request if it falls outside of that criterion.
Great, thanks. So, yeah, because I think those schools are doing an absolutely outstanding and invaluable job. So again, that's very reassuring. Thank you. So in Zone A, are there any criteria against either employment? So obviously thinking the fact that obviously maintaining someone's continuity of employment, which is key ultimately to getting them into a position where they're under their own steam again. Is that in place? Or for that matter, what about medical? So I know I think mental health is mentioned, but
medical and mental health is in zone.
Yeah, because if I was thinking if an individual was undergoing a series of, say, major surgical events, cancer treatment might be an example, where continuity of care would be critical, if not potentially clinically then to their own well-being from a social perspective.
Absolutely, that's covered in Band A, so there's both physical and mental health conditions covered in that criterion. So you're absolutely right, in those circumstances we would ensure that.
Lovely, thank you. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, would you like me to talk around employment? Yeah.
Oh, yes, please. Yeah.
From the case law, employment sits in Band B. 60 to 90 minute commutes are deemed to be, otherwise, there would be very little scope to place people appropriately, and that would mean working people potentially rough sleeping and street homeless, which we absolutely would not be advocating for. So yes, we have to sort of follow what the case law position is, and that's what is deemed appropriate, which is why that's inclusive within Band B.
Thank you. Yeah, do we find that works in practice? Because it's given what we're likely to be dealing with, people with high, a lot of pressure on their costs in general. The cost of either public transport or vehicular transport, 60 or 90 minutes a day, it's a big ask, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, with the challenging position we're in currently, we have to be led by the case law decisions that have been made, because otherwise, for most people, either we are dealing with very vulnerable people that often fall into Band A, or working people. So that would mean that everyone would need to be placed in borough, and I think we have to be realistic around, we've got to put those parameters in around suitability and availability. If we had the availability in borough, we would have in borough, but unfortunately the current stock position we're in, we have to make some tough decisions, and this is the way for us to fairly look at each case and grade that appropriately.
Thanks. Is that resulting in additional costs for us ultimately, with people taking longer to get back under their own steam kind of thing?
For most people that fall into temporary accommodation, it is because affordable housing options are not affordable for them. So they are solely reliant on either very reduced rents or for social housing, and we know the social housing rates are considerable. So most people that fall into temporary accommodation, it is for the reason that there is very few other alternate arrangements available for them.
Thank you. Okay. Oh yes, there was a paragraph at the top of page 7 in the policy which talks about offers of alternative accommodation in the private rented sector, which I read a couple of times and I'm afraid I didn't quite understand what it was driving at. So would you mind just explaining that for me, please?
So that is when we're working with private rental sector providers and we can demonstrate that we've found a private sector placement for a family that is affordable after we've done a financial assessment on the family. That is a suitable alternative. So we can discharge our homelessness duty if we can demonstrate against the Housing Act that we can show that the placement is for a year in duration at least and that it's affordable within the financial assessment of the family. So we don't have to put someone into social housing with the regulation, we have to put someone into something suitable and affordable.
Thank you. Yeah, that's clear now. Okay. And practically, how do we handle individual cases where there's a kind of a conflict between, on the one hand, their Zone A qualifying, and on the other hand, their means are limited by, cap on welfare benefits, for example?
So they would be housed within temporary accommodation until suitable social housing or affordable rent is sourced for them.
Okay. And the local authority will be paying the difference effectively, yeah?
Yes, we would be using their housing benefit to contribute towards those costs, which is why we want to look for solutions which are as close to housing benefit as reasonably possible, so we're not funding or the shortfall between those two. So that's why we're looking for the most affordable options to minimise that gap and strain on council finances.
And to make it.
Thank you. So just the section on temporary accommodation, refusal of temporary accommodation and advice and support, it refers to, in the second paragraph, to bands. I assume that's the zones, is it? Zones A, B and C, because it only mentions band once in the whole document. Okay, thanks. I think, again, I understand the reasons for this, I think, but we were talking about if a tenant refuses temporary accommodation, there's kind of no right to appeal. I don't know whether that's the right way of describing it. And I was just wondering, might it be fairer to have some kind of an appeal mechanism? Perhaps it exists informally, on which the housing officer could adjudicate, and then that's it, kind of thing.
So under legislation, we can make an offer of accommodation. There is a one offer approach. There is statutory review under legislation, but that's not about preference. That's about, can we demonstrate as an authority that what we have offered is suitable by law. So if we feel it's suitable by law and it's compliant with our policy and our independent review officer agrees, then that is your final officer. If the independent review officer doesn't, you'll make a secondary offer, but we don't keep making offers on preference. It has to be to meet need because of the absolute shortage in availability.
Okay, fine, I understand. So, and I suppose the independent assessment is an appeals mechanism of sorts, isn't it, in that instance?
It's led by the legislation around that, so it is a legislative process we have to follow.
But presumably, accommodation allowing, we could be more generous if we chose to within financial constraints, I'm guessing, could we?
So anything we offer has to be affordable. So we do a financial assessment of each family. So what we offer has to be affordable within their budget.
Thank you. So, Councillor, I don't know if you've got anything else, but that's all I had on agenda item number 4. That's fine. Okay, let's move on to agenda item number 5 then. So this is starting on page 49 of the agenda. So I will just again read the matters for consideration, which are that the Housing Scrutiny Committee considers and provides feedback on the tenant and leaseholder engagement policy, strategy, and also on the public consultation questionnaires and approach. So over to Councillor Brown again, I guess.
Again, this is about transparency and fairness in terms of how we lease our properties and to whom and what those tenancies look like. It's important that we support those tenancies in terms of how can you be a good tenant as well, and so it's looking at the support we give our residents whilst they are tenants. This report also looks at evictions and when they're used and how they should be used, and that when they are absolutely necessary. It also looks at under-occupancy and the problems that has, as well as overcrowding and the issues that has for our tenancies. So what I want the committee to consider is whether or not our current tenancy management practice aligns with the requirements that we have now. And that's the task for you guys tonight, is to ensure that we are able to have that full transparency in terms of our tenancy agreements.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Webb, do you have any questions either on the report or the policy or on strategy documents here?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think first, the only main one around the policy is the use of tenant reps, how that will be formulated, who will be involved, how many, will it be an interview process or is it an election process, and so on. So if that could be explained in the round really for me, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. So there is, as we say in the document, it's a menu of involvement. So when we're talking about tenant involvement at the most strategic level, so at board level, so this is slightly different from having tenant reps. So this is not about representing an area, it's about representing tenant voice at that strategic level, which I think housing associations have done very well for some time, that sit at board level, equal and shoulder to members and officers. So we will be going through quite a robust interview process by panel. So we will be interviewing not only with officers but with some colleagues from housing associations that can provide some independent voice to that interview process. We've looked at best practice from Westminster and from some housing associations that have gone through quite this robust process. So there'll be 5 tenant reps at the most strategic level. But actually throughout, what we've realised is tenant reps in terms of area based doesn't work. So we're looking now at more thematic feedback. So that can be aligned to policy, that can be aligned to particular areas people are interested in. So when we're doing the tenant action and estate days, we're going to flood those areas with our ASB teams, with our resi involvement teams, with our tenant teams. And then if themes are coming up regularly, that you said we did, you know, say if it's around ASB, if it's around electric pedocycles on a estate, whatever the issues are, then we will look to then do those thematic groups that are actually not just going what's happening in Lee Chapel North, what's happening in Lee Chapel South. We're saying what thematically do residents care about and how do we talk to the resident voice across. So there's that way of engaging with us. There's informal engagement of coming to our events, being more accessible, having more happening in the evening, online for people that are carers or have disability needs themselves. But also what Louise's team are doing for resi engagement is what we have been very guilty of in the past at the council is saying, we're the council, come and talk to us about what we want to talk to you about. Whereas this approach looks at mapping that community infrastructure with Grant Taylor's team, with his knowledge in communities, but also the knowledge of our tenancy officers in communities, and ensuring that if there's existing infrastructure, say there's a mum and baby group that's well attended by our tenants, or a particular school, we've done lots of work with some schools in the borough where we know there's a high level of tenants or density within our estates, then actually going to where our residents naturally meet and reside rather than saying, come and talk to us where suits us. So it's a slight different shift in terms of we'll come to you, you don't have to come to us. So trying to mix up those opportunities. So when we say menu of involvement, we mean from the most minimal involvement that tenants may want to talk to us for 10 minutes at a school fair, or it might be that people want to take a real strategic role in driving our policy position, and we welcome that across all of the tenant participation available. Any participation, even if it's 5 minutes a year, is valuable.
Yes, thank you for that. That's that kind of explains things really concisely in really my expectation really of how I see resident or tenant engagement. So there are mechanisms and initiatives that have been used anyway before, and obviously the council are now in a position to use that best practice to formulate policy and strategy around that now. So that would be good to see how that kind of develops, and again really about the data coming forward regarding that and how many people get engaged. Around the strategy, I've got a question mark outcomes really around Morgan Sindel subgroup that's been set up. Also the Resident Voice newsletter. I mean, how are residents are leading on this, or how are they involved in the production of the Resident Voice newsletter?
So at the moment we have a significant participation of resident voice, so it's around 800 residents. So yeah, 800 residents that are on our actively involved resident meetings. So we send them lots of information, we ask about what matters to them, and that's what helps our resident involvement officers construct that. What we're missing at the moment strategically is what would sit at that board level. So actually start to say thematically, with knowledge of our housing improvement plan, with knowledge of our policy development, for those residents to start saying, how do we share this with our fellow tenants and leaseholders? What is important to translate and make sure that messaging is replicative? So I think at a grassroots level we do that very well, and where we want the board to stretch that further is around the strategic stuff we're doing. How do we feed that into the resident voice, and making sure that matters as well, because we know ASB matters, we know tidy estates matter, but actually some of the strategic stuff really does matter. It's fundamental to how we manage people's homes and lives. So we need to make sure we're using those residents to sort of do that translation to make sure that that's coming through also.
Okay, thank you. Just got a question around empowerment and engagement focus groups. How will they be set up, where and when? I was going to talk from some personal experience because I used to run focus groups, so it's important to have the right people there, the right quantities, because you can't have them too unwieldy, but also setting the scene as well. For example, will they be online? Is it envisaged to use online mechanisms for that, or traditionally in-person meetings?
Absolutely both, Councillor Webb. So that is what the strategy terms that comm strategy. So when we are going out doing tenancy audits, we are asking the question, how would you like to be engaged with? To try and see, you know, is it evenings, is it daytime, is it digital? And actually what we want to show the regulator is from that feedback we're getting from residents that our communications plan is replicative of what that tenant mix is. So when we say, you know, 50% of people want something they can read online, then we'll make sure that our comms strategy is replicative of what tenants are asking for. So for the consultation for this very document, we have got in-person focus groups, we've got online focus groups. We're going to events across the borough over the summer months and doing that informal engagement piece. We're giving out cards with QR codes so people can digitally feed back to us. So we're trying to take quite a spread approach to important consultation and engagement to make sure that we are meeting as many residents' needs as possible. And especially where we're looking at policies that may disproportionately affect certain residents. So if we're looking at things like sheltered schemes or disability-friendly accommodation, that we then use our tenant data to actually target those residents particularly and talk about the issues that matter to them. So yes, that tenant data is what's really going to be driving that comms plan, and that's what we'll want to be doing coming into reports going forward. Is we want to talk about where we've had positive engagement and where we've got gaps in our engagement. In our reports, what we will discuss is what we're going to do to address that next time. So we can't get it right every time, but we need to make sure that test and learn approach, what's working, what isn't, and hopefully from a scrutiny perspective, you'll see that communications loop in our reporting. So look, I can't promise that we're going to get it right every single time, but we've got to take that kind of continuous attitude to our learning with it.
Thank you. And are you set up and resourced appropriately and enough to be able to carry this forward at this stage?
Yep, so we have a housing improvement manager that does the oversight and strategy. We have a tenant involvement coordinator and 2 tenant involvement officers that specifically work on that. But this is about every visit counts. So we are working with Morgan Sindel and John's team that are going into people's homes. We're working with our tenant teams, we're working with our ASB team. So it is not the responsibility of Resi Involvement team to do all of resident involvement. You know, we are all meeting and touching the lives of residents every single day, and the culture that we are now building into the service is that every contact counts. So making sure that, you know, when we're doing the TSMs, if we're doing a standard visit, go, here's a card, here's the TSM, this is what it is, this is why it's important. It needs to be embedded. It's all of our jobs to understand what our tenants want and need. So it's trying to build that culture over the next 12 to 18 months to embed that within Team BAU, really.
Thank you. So going back to Morgan Sindel, I mean, are they Are they embedding that within their ethos, really? Are they fully signed up to that? How would that actually work, that feedback will they engage with?
So the new managing director at Morgan Sindall is working alongside us with that. So what Morgan Sindall now do is they have sessions downstairs in the Bas Centre where people can come and report and discuss face to face, which is really helpful. There's a number of sessions over the course of the year where they're working with us on estates. So again, people can come and see Morgan Sindall where they live and where they operate. And then we are working alongside them with work like the tenant satisfaction measures, that when people are going into homes that they're able to give out those cards, talk about the TSMs. So we are driving our ethos through them, but it is challenging working with contractors, but we are making that through the strategic groups, through our operational groups, and John can echo this, but we are trying to pull that resident voice into everything that we're doing. So yeah, absolutely, we are working alongside our contractors to deliver that. And that's not just our repairs contractor, that's, we work with Peabody for our in-reach and outreach housing services. We work with other organisations. We're trying to embed all of those organisations in terms of how we engage with our tenants.
That's lovely, thank you. Also under empowering engagement, I noticed the figures quoted were as an achievement in engagement, 20% tenants and 10% leaseholders. I know that would be an increase of what is currently, but it seems a little bit low really as a aspiration really at this stage.
So the regulator expects around 10%, so we want to double that regulator expectation. In terms of good practice, most councils that are very high performing operate at 15 to 20% in terms of each year, because not all residents are going to engage in the matters that mean something to them. So we want that engagement to be meaningful. In terms of engagement, like obviously we will send letters and we will send updates to all of our residents. It's about that two-way communication that's that 20%. We will outwardly communicate to all of our tenants, but we can't expect to get that reciprocal feedback from that percentage. So 20% is actually quite a high level across the board in terms of active engagement, and the regulator expects around 10% to demonstrate proportionality.
That's great, thank you. And under enhancing governance and accountability, are we envisaging eliciting the support and training from external providers like TPAS, for example?
Yeah, so within the action plan, we have got working with TPAS and Housemark for that very reason. So yes, we will be working with them on benchmarking and best practice. That is within our service plan, and that is being delivered year to date. We've already spoke to Housemark in the last couple of weeks, and we've been doing some learning around TSMs, and we're already TPAS accredited as an organisation, so we work with TPAS as well.
That's lovely, thank you. And I've just got one last question really about leaseholders. As you will know, the government are really pushing to abolish the term around leasehold ownership now. Are we kind of looking into how that would affect the council going forward? It looks like there will be pushing for what is known as common hold tenures, and how that would fit in the framework within the council going forward. Thank you.
So we have actively engaged in all of the consultations with central government. So we've done that consultation stage. We're awaiting that feedback in terms of what that looks like going forward. So as soon as we have the confirmation of the finite plans, we'll be working with our legal team and our home ownership team to develop those. But at the moment, yes, we've actively participated in the consultation, but we're obviously awaiting the results of that consultation to be able to plan what our next moves will be around that.
That's great, yeah, lovely, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Webb, that's great. Okay, so actually just before I get into my questions, just touching on one of the points that you raised on focus groups. So I know we mentioned that we do digital focus groups and in person. I think the only thing I would kind of add from personal experience is that digital focus groups might seem like a good option, and they might well be preferable for residents, but my experience is they're not as effective. they're much more difficult to moderate, particularly in things like reading the face of the person in the corner of the room who's not saying anything but actually has got a lot to say. So it's more of an observation. I think I'm not necessarily expecting you to answer that.
So we are working very closely with TPAS in terms of their kind of sociological background, their research. They really are experts in the field. So our staff get training from TPAS in terms of how to engage, how to help vulnerability. So we try to actively benefit and educate ourselves to make sure that we learn to facilitate. So our team are working on, Louise is doing a training and development plan, and that will include like facilitation training and honing and developing our schemes. And again, sharing back best practice across Essex. We have really good relationships with fellow housing officers, and we have Essex Housing Officers Group. We share that best practice amongst those groups about what works well and what isn't working well. So that's what our kind of continuous improvement is. Again, we will feed back around the effectiveness of the consultation or the effectiveness of that communications, and we will look to tweak and develop that to demonstrate what works. But I think we want to take a scattergun approach over the first 18 months to see what works for our residents. And we don't want to ever sit still for too long. So constantly reviewing, because, you know, methods of communication are constantly changing. You know, we could have one generation that wants to communicate via WhatsApp, we can have another generation. So we need to be continually looking at our demographics and tweaking that. We can't keep in a way of communicating every single year because that feels comfortable. Actually, we need to feel uncomfortable most of the time to be able to drive that, because I'm sure my children will tell me about all sorts of apps that are coming out that I'm not aware of, and we need to stay with our finger on the pulse and working with the likes of TPAS to see how people are using innovation to communicate as well, but also not leaving behind our residents that aren't on that pathway. So it's really taking that seesaw approach, and I hope that through scrutiny we can be continually reviewing and looking at that and making sure that we're all using our expertise to kind of drive that tenant participation as greatly as we can.
And that's why that tenant data profile information is so vital, because that's going to then inform that proactive experience.
Lovely, thanks. Yeah, I think it's something to bear in mind, because obviously the one thing you can't do is run the same group digitally and then in face-to-face and assess which was more effective. So I just think it's important to bear that in mind. So before we get into my specific questions, again, I had a couple of, what you call them really, overarching points, I suppose, which I'm not necessarily expecting you to, respond to, but I'd just like to be recorded and for you to bear in mind in your decision-making process. So the first one is that obviously a tenant engagement policy should deliver both what the majority view and common priorities is across the whole resident base. Make sure you understand that, but also understanding the particular needs of minority and vulnerable groups. And as I said, sometimes those are conflicting. So I would encourage the team to always bear that in mind, that we have to do both. You can't really do one or the other. The other one was, in my experience, the most effective engagement strategies, and this is in terms of what data you collect, and then more importantly, what you actually do with it, use statistically significant quantitative survey data to identify key themes and priorities. So it sounds like the TSM might be quite useful for us in that. And then effectively consolidated insights from qualitative touch points to understand what the points that are being made actually are. So an example might be, rate the repair strategy on a scale of 1 to 10, and then qualitative would help you understand what's behind that. And also potential solutions where scores are low, or for that matter, things gone right where scores are high, what's actually driving the high scores we need to carry on doing. So again, not expecting to answer it as such, but I think it's really important for us to bear in mind that it has to be a mix of quantitative and qualitative.
So absolutely, a mix of the two data sets, but actually I think in terms of sort of statistical significance, actually some of the questions you said, I think in terms of innovation, I think we will move far beyond simple ratings. The work that myself and Louise have been working on today, kind of our BAU project, is taking complaints data using AI and insights and being able to thematically drill down into the complaints that we're receiving from our tenants to drive what the thematics of our focus groups are across the course of the year. So it's not a kind of one shot in moment in time. We're taking actual evidence from what is mattering to tenants and what is really bothering them enough to complain to us, and using data such as that, as well as our softer data, which absolutely has importance. Around what you said about not just taking the majority view, that is why our tenant data is so important, and it is about using those protected characteristics, ethnicities and vulnerabilities. So when we've got policies that really matter to specific groups, whether that's accessibilities or disability access, or even around, for some authorities, they've seen disproportionate allocation of property to certain groups. Why is that? Is it barriers to employment, skills, etc.? So I think really using our data and AI insight to drive that even further than just simple qualitative and quantitative data. So I think that's over the next 18 months, hopefully this committee will see that we are using those traditional methods, but we're actually trying to use innovation as much as we can to drive those outcomes to really meet what residents are worrying about.
Thanks, that sounds brilliant. Very reassured to hear that, thank you. So, where are we? Okay, yes, you answered that question, that's good. So just moving on to a question that comes out of the strategy document. In the background and overview, it looks like we've collected a very extensive and disparate range of qualitative data during 2024-25, the big long list of what we've got. What's the overarching plan to digest and effectively prioritise these insights? And whilst doing that, dealing with issues such as self-selecting samples, i.e. only certain people are on certain social media platforms, how representative comments made are to the majority view, or for that matter to the minority group concerns we've mentioned, and other stuff such as who shouts loudest gets heard, etc.
So this is why the tenant audit process is so important, to understand who our tenants are. So in the past, the team have really actively participated in communities, but we've actively participated in communities that actively would like to participate with us. What the benefit of the new approach is going, thank you for active participation, but where are our gaps in participation? I think that's going to be the difference moving forward, is that we're actively focusing on the gaps in participation and looking at our tenant profile. Is it because people aren't participating because our current tenant and leaseholder group is 2 o'clock on Thursday afternoon? Well, that takes out people that are on the school run, people with disabilities that struggle to leave their home. It's all of those factors. So that's what we need to be obviously praising our act, because this is all great active participation, but it's that data and insight that Louise and the Resi engagement team are looking at capturing. So they've captured all the people they've spoken to, but Louise's biggest question to us was about what that, Louise is new to role, she's 6 weeks in, and that is really what we are driving. It's about, we've got new data forms, we've got the data that's coming back in from our staff is a lot more standardised. That's why we've got the digital tenancy audit form, because there's no deviation. It's a standardised form. So the data that comes in, we can be much more quantitative around, because it's in a standardised format. So in terms of comparison and doing CV analysis and such, it's a lot more effective in that way. So what we've learned from the tenancy audits, we will be replicating across tenancy engagement. So that was a real test and learn for us. We worked at pace. It was a 1 week turnaround to develop that and get the digital solution, which was fantastic. But the lessons we've learned for that will infiltrate what we're doing within Resi engagement. So it's a journey over the next 18 months, and we're hoping that we can demonstrate that in all the reports that come to this committee about what that resident engagement journey looks like. So hopefully you'll be seeing an improvement in both innovation, qualitative and quantitative, and also around areas of weakness where we can actively develop.
Thanks. But so I'm just going back to the qualitative bit for the moment. So you've got this mound of stuff that's coming in 24, 25, load of different data sources, different formats. Some of it's digital, some of it's not. How do you prioritise it?
So we have been looking at the themes from the data that's come in, but the main thing that we're looking at the moment is our complaints data, because that is so comprehensive. So what has come through in complaints data and what are we hearing in communities, by adding those two data sets together is what we're going to do the themes at. So the things that are coming out regularly is around repairs process, dish repair and antisocial behaviour and feelings of safety. So those are three key areas. We're doing the new policy on ASB this year, so again we'll be doing active consultation like on this policy. The dish repair process, that's going to be, Louise, that's August, September time. Yeah, August, September. Yeah, that consultation will be going. So the things that matter to residents that we are hearing now, we're prioritising the policies to drive the change based on the resident voice. So yes, is it in the format we'd like? But no, we've actively used it with our complaints data to do that prioritisation, to bridge us to the position that we are moving towards with our data.
Okay, so if I understand correctly then, we're not driving the themes from the qual, we're driving the themes from the data, and then we're drilling down on the themes with the qual. Right, great. Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you. Okay. So, yeah, actually, I had a point on the percentages. I mean, I must say the first thing, I know it's regulator driven, you've answered that, but I mean, again, I would have thought in terms of how many residents you're involving, you'd want to, you know, a statistically significant and representative number of residents rather than it's got to be 10%, it's got to be 20, but okay. I guess we need to do what the regulator says. But I was intrigued that we had 80% target on communication preference data and 75% target on tenant profiles complete by the same date, and those percentages seemed terribly close, but kind of I wasn't quite sure why they were appropriate if they were so specific.
Yeah, because often people leave out their, people don't want to share their personal data with us in terms of but they are happy to tell us about their preferences, but often don't want to inform us of their profile data. So we do have a slight significance there. So we just want to make sure that, you know, really we're engaging with residents how they want to be engaged with.
Okay, so it's appropriate, one's lower than the other, basically, yeah. Okay, thanks. Lovely. Yeah, I think that's it, actually. I think you answered the remaining questions I had. Councillor Webb, have you got anything further?
Not really, Chair. Just a couple of things. Just an additional, as I was thinking, sitting here thinking. On the back of focus groups, for example, it might be worth perhaps looking at. I don't know what the practicalities of that would be, but I know in certain sectors they have used litmus groups, for example, attached to the procurement. So I don't think it's something that's already been looked at, or something that might be worth looking into, engaging tenants with, to inform on equipment and so on that goes into homes under the repair process. The other thing is on page 76, it does get a list. I'm not quite sure why it's there, but I know I can see, you know, it makes the report, if you like, more effective. We've got a whole list of engagement sessions that have already taken place, which is great. But I think it would have been probably more useful to kind of list the outcomes alongside those, really, to give it a bit more impetus, really.
So obviously this is sort of inherited data since I've managed the service, and I think this was my biggest call, is that, okay, and what is the question that I always ask my officers? You're telling me this, and what are you doing with it? And for me, that is the culture change that we're driving throughout the team. If we're collecting a piece of data, what are you doing with it? What's going to change? Or what do we need to tell the residents aren't going to change, and why? So this is the whole reason for this policy, is closing that loop. We've done lots of great engagement, and I'm not saying it hasn't fed back into policy, but it's about closing that circular loop all the way back through the governance process. So every time Scrutiny looks at a report, you can say, I can see there's resident voice in this. I can see the effort that has been taken to try and get the resident view in. And all of my team have that embedded, that I expect that resident voice narrative to be in all policy and strategy documents that we bring forward. So yes, that it absolutely is a weakness, and that's what we recognise in the self-inspection, that is an area, and which is why this policy has been the first one to come to Scrutiny to try and drive that.
Yeah, understood, recognise that, yes, thank you for that.
Okay, I think that's that item 5 concluded then. Thank you very much for your answers there. So the only remaining item on the agenda then is the work programme 25-26 on page 95 of the agenda. The matters for consideration are that the committee notes and endorses the items currently identified for 25-26 as set out in the report, and considers any further items that need to be added. And the committee notes the Cabinet Forward Plan and considers any items that fall within its remit that it may wish to consider. So the only issue here is that I think that the schedule in the report is not the current one as I understand it. So I'm not.
There's been an extra one added.
Right. Okay.
Am I going to share with the members tonight?
Okay.
We'll make sure that it's emailed out to everybody. Yeah. No,
There's a.
So we're going to make sure that that's added.
Yeah, there's a few bits on there. I think most of the items shown for September are actually going to be October, I think I'm right in saying. And then...
Sorry, it's the Ombudsman and MSPS are the two items for September. All other ones will be in the October meeting. Because of the Ombudsman complaints data, submission date, it would need to go to the September meeting.
Thank you. And I think also... Thanks very much. I think also, if I remember correctly, the agenda item with reference to the 4 Street and Oak Bridge conversion from shelter to general was going to be February now, I think. Yeah.
In terms of the plan, not the. So yeah. So in terms of Kathy coming back with the resident plan and engagement and everything, yeah, we're saying February for that.
Yeah, fine. I just thought I'd confirm that. To be the case. So, Councillor Webb, have you got anything that you think we should be adding to that list, or are you aware of any cabinet items you'd like to look at?
No, just one thing that did occur to me. We haven't mentioned the Warm Homes programme. An update on that might be kind of relevant. I understand we've received government funding to get things started on that. So it might be useful to know what the how things are progressing with that. Unless that's already kind of envisaged in a report, and another report from you, John.
We could probably bring it in September as part of the MSPS because they are delivering it on our behalf. So.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that sounds okay. Good to me. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say that sounds good, John, because I guess it's going to be before any decision-making process, which is going to be for the winter. It kind of needs to be in the early autumn, doesn't it? So that sounds fine. Anything else, Councillor Webb, from you on work programme?
No. I just had a note there about KPIs in performance report, but that's already been kind of covered anyway, already in previous discussions. So.
That will be within your housing improvement plan. The data will form that item number that will fall into that, if that's okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I think that's it then. Everybody, thank you very much for your participation in the meeting. Good night.